With 9.3 million job openings recorded at the end of April this year, the US economy is seeing one of the largest labor shortages since the year 2000 when the government started collecting this data. Employers that have been hit especially hard are those in the hospitality industry. So to get a little bit of insight on this topic, today I'm joined by an industry expert, Omar Ali-Shamaa, an attorney with Wolfe Pincavage. So Omar, I know that you specialize in representing clients in the hospitality sector, many of whom are having troubles attracting and retaining talent during the current job market. Are there any type of hiring incentives that you are seeing businesses use to successfully hire and attract talent that maybe other businesses or markets can mimic?
Yeah, so there's a few different things that I've seen clients that I've worked with and clients that I've through other clients I've heard that they're doing that's really helping to kind of attract employees during this kind of labor shortage that we're seeing, especially in the hospitality sector. So I'll talk about 3 or 4 things I've kind of seen that the hospitality has been doing. One of the first things that I've been seeing a lot lately, a little bit more of, is restaurants or hospitality kind of partnering up with kind of really strategic and the right organizations to kind of recruit really targeted, specific kind of talent. So a good example is I've seen in the restaurants that I've worked with is, and this has happened before, but it's definitely increased a lot more since the pandemic and the shortage, is kind of partnering up with like culinary schools and technical schools, and even to a certain extent, some high schools who have kind of some culinary classes or geared towards that in a way where restaurants can kind of form partnerships with these local culinary schools. So students, one, either kind of get their foot in the door with certain restaurants, get experience, and for certain kind of fine dining restaurants, there's kind of this concept that a lot of they call it staging or staging, which essentially is kind of an internship where you're kind of following along and watching, but also they kind of sometimes put you to work a little bit and kind of teach you. So it's a win-win for both, but that's kind of the exception. The majority, I think, as far as partnering with the right organizations, is kind of recruiting kind of talent early on in the culinary school process, kind of like bringing them on to kind of work in the kitchen and for that, so get them experience. And I think that's been a really good help because you're recruiting the right talent rather than someone who's kind of looking for a transitional job. So it's really targeted, and I think that's something that's kind of been happening a lot more right now. Another way I think that a lot of restaurants I've seen is they're getting creative with kind of the recruitment process. So if you think about it, job ads kind of tend to be really kind of dry and boring a lot of time. So one of the creative things is kind of an employee referral bonus plan. Many times in order to get the job, it's unfortunate, but it's the reality sometimes when you're trying to get a job, it's about who you know rather than what you know sometimes. So kind of tapping into that and using your existing employees to kind of recruit for you is a really good way to do it. One, it's kind of almost self-advertising. The second way is you're kind of doing 2 things. You're bringing on people that your employees want to work with, so they're going to stay longer, and you're filling your shortage. And the way to incentivize those employees to do that is you say, if you bring us someone who we retain for 90 days, you'll get either a small bonus, some extra PTO days paid off. So because really the cost of getting a quality employee is far greater than having to pay a small bonus out or giving some extra PTO days. So that's one thing that like really I think I've seen work, because a lot of times people just really want to work with their friends. And especially in the hospitality industry, if you're short on servers or bartenders, you want to work with someone you enjoy it with. And if you have a better kind of work atmosphere, you're going to retain those employees a lot longer. And that's one thing I think that people need to kind of really tap into more is getting that using your existing employees, especially if you have some really rock star ones, to kind of really have them kind of go out and get them for you. But you incentivize them with some cash or a PTO or other things like that. And probably the most obvious is really to kind of start really paying better pay and better benefits. It's really obvious, but I think you have to kind of do that in tandem with a lot of other things, as far as I mentioned, partnering with the right organization, using your existing employees. So one of the other ways I've seen a client of mine get really creative with this is kind of better benefits and pay is where think of a coupon for a restaurant. Rather than a coupon where you're getting 10% off, they're giving their employees a business card almost saying, give this to someone, a family, a friend, and if they come to the restaurant or the hotel or whatever it is, we'll give them a free appetizer or something of value similar to a coupon. But the kicker is for the employees, you'll get 5% of the sales on that check. So it's the same thing as if you gave a 10% discount, the 10% discount's going to the customer. Here now you're giving kind of a 10% discount, but half of that's going to the employee's pocket. So you're almost creating these like salespeople as far as your staff to bring in more business for you, and they get a piece of it. So they're really incentivized to just bring in as many people as possible, and their pay is getting better. The restaurant's having more people come in, and that's a little way to kind of incentivize them to stay on longer and to kind of fill shortages that you're having. So that's a really creative way. I've seen a lot of people kind of do that. And the last one I'll talk about, which I've seen a lot more frequently, is it's tying into pay, but it's kind of establishing a profit sharing with hourly employees or just all employees, in the sense where if the business is doing well and it's profiting, you start sharing, you create a plan where employees get a small percentage of that. But when you advertise that the business engages in a profit sharing and things like that, it kind of gets people at least interested in the business. And part of the hardest process is getting people to come to you sometimes and to apply. So things like that, where it's not costing you a little bit more, and the amount that you're giving away in profits, a small profit sharing, usually would outweigh the cost of losing employees or having to hire and train employees. So I've seen a little bit of a combination of all of these things lately that's really helped kind of fill the gaps for some of these restaurants and kind of hospitality clients I work with.
Awesome. Those are a lot of great tactics that actually I had never even heard of. Most of them. In addition to those hiring strategies, what other sort of advice are you offering clients who are currently struggling with this labor shortage and employee onboarding?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that I've talked to clients about. The first is somewhat obvious, but I think a lot of clients are resistant to it, especially if they've been around for a lot, is you have to really invest in technology. It seems really obvious, but any business that's not really investing in technology that either cuts your cost down or lowers your labor cost is you're just not keeping up with the times, and it's not really helping you. You have to just do that. It's just the nature of it. And really customers expect that. Really, they expect certain technology and certain things like that. There are plenty of apps and softwares that you can use, such as like Toast Go or Order and Pay, that really make your efficiency, that help you work with fewer employees. So it kind of solves the shortage by actually having you work with less employees. Kind of a roundabout way to fix the problem as well. I have shortage of employees, but maybe I just need less employees if I just implement the right technology pieces. Well, that's one way to kind of do it. So the other thing is that really is not intuitive is you have to double down on existing employees, because the only thing worse than not having enough employees is losing the good ones that you do have, because studies have shown that it's cost about $3,000 to $6,000 to replace an employee when it comes to hiring, training, and investing in that time. So if you add that up, after a few employees, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars just in, not only are you losing great employees, you're having to replace them, and it's not always the easiest. So you really need to invest in them, whether it's additional training, getting them certified in certain things, putting together maybe a profit sharing plan, having where the profits are shared, small profits, but the longer you're there, you get a little bit more, perhaps, things like that. Having team meetings where I think I'm a big proponent of being really transparent with your employees, because I think transparency really helps keep employees there, because a lot of times employees feel like they're just kept in the dark and they just feel like they're a number. So I feel like if you're very transparent with the existing employees, having team meetings where you ask employees feedback on, well, what can we do to improve the business for the customers, but also what can we do to improve it for the employees? A lot of times people don't ask that second part of the question, and that's where you kind of falter. So I think that's really important, is to kind of double down on existing employees. Another thing that I've talked about is creating kind of these incentive programs. There's ways where you can create incentive programs for employees. I mentioned earlier about the kind of the card. Other ways is if kind of evaluate your business. If your business is is not doing so well because maybe you need more social media engagement or things like that. Your employees are a good way to kind of use that, and you can kind of create prizes and things like that. And you kind of advertise that. I think all of this needs to be in the kind of advertised to the employees that you're trying to bring on too, that you have all of these incentive programs, you do all of these things for existing employees, additional training and things like that, because people want to see that. It really helps when you're joining an establishment or a business where you know that you're going to work. Maybe you're a bartender server, you're making money on tips and this, but there's also other ways. If you kind of help with the social media engagement, if you bring in people, there's other ways where you're going to increase your pay and things like that. So I think that's really a good way to kind of help kind of with the shortages. A good way to streamline kind of this is joining these very targeted organizations in your industry. The big stands out for the restaurants is obviously the National Restaurant Association. Goes by the other NRA, as sort of people call it. It offers great advice and timely articles, and it has strategic partnerships such as health insurance that helps operators offer health insurance at a discount. And in the post-COVID world, employees are going to expect you to offer health insurance. In the restaurant industry, it's not always common, but even if you offer it, I think you have to offer it. And organizations like this actually have strategic partnerships with certain healthcare payers that actually help you bring them on and kind of get insurance right away. There's usually no waiting period. And these organizations also really have really good kind of training programs where your employees can kind of train on certain certifications, such as like Serve Safe, which is a proper way to serve people who are drinking alcohol, or hygiene, where you can kind of do it all online, where you can do it through apps and things like that. So it kind of cuts down on your onboarding time for employees, where they can kind of train in the background, not specifically in the restaurant for certain things. So you're not having them kind of follow someone around a restaurant and learning. They can kind of do the courses before they come in. When they come in, it's kind of more on the job training of this is where everything is. This is how we operate things.
So I guess to kind of flip angles here and kind of take it from a more legal standpoint, is there any type of language in employee contracts that employers should or can be using to help reduce employee turnaround?
So I'll start by saying that employee contracts generally don't help keep unhappy employees on. What contracts sometimes do is they kind of prolong a relationship. That's always not the best. But having said that, an employee contract, I mean, it shouldn't be used as the guide to retain employees, but it can help retain employees. So if you're putting together an employee contract, generally you're targeting kind of upper level employees, kind of management and kind of C-level people. So you're not really targeting the kind of hourly or lower level employees. You may, but that's generally not the idea. So my first recommendation always with these employment contracts is to be very transparent and clear from the very beginning, so you avoid issues down the line. So some of the provisions I recommend when I'm talking to clients, if they want to put together an employment agreement for someone in the hospitality industry, in order to keep employees, there's a lot of provisions that you want to do, but if you want to keep employees, there's a couple of key provisions that I always talk about. One is kind of opposite what you think is severance. That's kind of when you happen to leave, but the way you structure severance is you offer severance to an employee only if they're terminated or if they're terminated for cause. So what that means is they're not going to get a severance if they resign or they go to someone else. So they're incentivized to stay, because the only way that's ever going to happen is if they're fired without cause, for example. So that's one way. It's kind of the opposite. It's kind of an end around to kind of get them to stay a little bit longer. But that's one way, and employees want to see that usually in these type of contracts. The other thing is, which is very common, is you have to create incentives or bonuses in the employee contract with very specific targets. Set out the targets a little further out than they normally expect. So they have to, one, stay there longer. Two, they have to hit these really, may not be the hardest targets, but they have to hit targets that help the business. And also if they hit those targets, they're getting extra compensation on top of their base salary, things like that. That usually makes people stay a little bit longer because they want to reach that goal. They want to get that extra bonus. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. One things I like to do is kind of do a profit. I do a kind of a profit sharing, so to speak, where if you contribute to a certain profits, and there's usually a formula that we would implement in the contract, that if you contribute to a certain level of profits, maybe if you're a manager and you bring down labor costs or you bring down food costs, you get a percentage of that savings, for example. So it incentivizes you to, one, be there, kind of work a little bit harder, help the business, but in the end, you're really staying there longer because you're trying to hit those targets. So really, I think the one thing is to kind of, employees want to be incentivized to kind of, one, for better pay, two, to kind of almost somewhat have a goal or purpose. So I think that's really important to kind of put in employment contracts is, if you hit these certain milestones, you're going to get paid a little bit extra, or you're going to have these certain perks. It may be not money, it may be extra PTO days we talked about. Maybe you don't have to do certain things. Maybe you get a parking spot for a month right up front. There's a lot of different ways you can structure it to kind of incentivize them. And that usually kind of tends to keep people happy. And if people stay happy, they usually stay they usually stay longer. One thing that I've seen, I personally do not recommend it to clients, but I've seen it in clients when they ask for it, is I've seen it, and it's kind of been increasing more recently, is non-compete clauses. And what non-compete clauses do, essentially, they're not my favorite. They're not my favorite thing, and I try to dissuade clients from doing it. But what many employers do is they put non-compete clauses in there, saying essentially that if you resign or you leave, you can't go walk across the street and work for my competitor. And what that essentially does is it kind of locks them out of the market into staying with you a little bit longer. It's not my favorite thing to do. I don't recommend it, but it's definitely been increasing since it's kind of, especially in Florida. Florida is a very big proponent of employer non-competes, and they tend to enforce them. So employers tend to like those, but not my favorite thing, but that's definitely something that is definitely rising that I've seen so far.
Well, I think you covered a lot of information in this interview. It was amazing. Did you have any other final advice for businesses overcoming this labor shortage at this time?
So what I would say is kind of, especially is you have to be ready to adapt for the hospital, especially the hospitality industry. Hospitality industry has kind of gone through probably the worst of it since COVID, and working just in general, not in hospitality, working post-COVID has changed forever. I think everyone's realized that. Employers who think that they can go to the same way of doing things pre-COVID once things reopen up completely, or if people are fully vaccinated, is kind of naive to think that. You have to really adapt. And if you don't adapt, whether it's recruiting the right employees, strategically bringing on people, creating different incentives, or paying employees better, or creating ways to pay them better. Not necessarily, you may not be paying them more as a base salary, but creating ways where they can earn more. Really, you have to adapt and kind of do that, because just working in general post-COVID is completely different now. And I think if you don't adapt to that, and businesses who haven't adapted have either failed or are not gonna succeed. So I think you have to be ready to adapt. And if you don't, it's just not gonna work out for you. The last thing I'm a big proponent of this, I mentioned this earlier, I'm a big proponent of transparency with employees. One thing that I've seen in the hospitality industry that's rising is this concept now called open book management, which essentially is kind of what it sounds like. You're opening your books a little bit so that employees can kind of see, it's basically financial transparency. A lot of times you start it with kind of higher level management employees to kind of understand it and show them, this is where we're at. This is what we need to fix in order to be profitable. This is what we need to fix to be better. And your management team helps you work on that. And slowly, once you kind of figure out the right way and the right method, you can kind of slowly show it to lower level employees, because it really empowers them to kind of see like, well, I contributed to this. And if we improve, I'm going to get a better bonus. And if we improve, I can maybe get a percentage of profits if you have a profit sharing system in place. So that's one thing that's kind of rising. I've seen in the hospitality industry is this open book management style, and I've seen it, it's shown that it actually increased profits, because now employees know where they're messing up and they're kind of being held a little bit more accountable. So I think that's a really good way to kind of adapt and kind of do things differently, is to kind of be more transparent with employees, because it's harder to get employees. When you do get them, you want to hang on to them. So that's one way to kind of fix the problem overall, is get them in, and then when you get them in, keep them as long as you can.
Awesome. Well, I think that was all that we had for today. Omar, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me.